Okay, good morning, class. My topic is on government aid or welfare. So my claim is that people that receive welfare food stamps, if they were to be drug tested, it'd be a benefit for the government and taxpayers. To start off with some of the cons or arguments against this claim, the fact is that some people might find it maybe unconstitutional, arguing that it violates the right of being protected from unreasonable searches. Also, it's people who argue that it'd be like if the government is assuming that just because you have low income or reported, you're automatic drug addict. But for my first supporting claim, it's that if welfare recipients are drug tested, it would possibly lower drug use. For example, to back that up, is that many people who use drugs and they receive welfare, if required to be drug tested, it'd be like a step forward in stopping drug abuse and a step forward in getting help that they need. And it would be also help to make sure that only the people who actually need welfare or help, that they actually get the help and not the people who are just drug addicts. Like, for example, there's cases where people who receive food stamps, they sell their card for money to buy drugs. And with that, there'd be a way to stop that. And then also another people also claim that many people say this phrase, it's if you have enough money for drugs, then you don't need welfare. So that I'm saying basically it could also help save money for taxpayers and make sure the benefits and the money goes to people that actually need it. Not every state had started doing this. Only 13 have. One of them being North Carolina. This past year, they began drug testing people for certain welfare benefits. Of the first group of people that they drug tested, 24% came out positive for illegal drug. And then of a group of 89 people who got scheduled to be drug tested, 21 of them came out positive, and also 70 others that were scheduled to be drug tested never showed up for their drug test. And in some cases, like Florida, they haven't been successful with their drug test. In many cases, out of several drug tests that they start, only at least 15% of them come out positive, and many people are seeing that as a waste of money because of that. A waste of money because it's basically proving, well, in Florida at least, that it's basically a waste of time and a waste of money because not everyone's doing drugs. And just to conclude, drug testing people who receive welfare or benefits from the government, it would not only help to ensure that, or to help drug addicts or drug users get off the drugs and seek for help, but it will also help to make sure that people who actually need it get the government aid. And that's it.
Can we give you my other copy of the final draft amendment, because I gave it for verification.
Okay. All right, Jeovany, the proposition's pretty clearly identified at the beginning. I don't know if this is a conditional kind of statement. If the test were given, then it would have these particular benefits. That's the way it's phrased. And I think that is a claim of fact as opposed to a policy claim. So you did kind of manage to get that phrased correctly for the purpose of this assignment. You do have two distinct supporting points. They aren't really previewed at the beginning of the speech. They come up as you're presenting your argument, and that's okay, except that it's easier for an audience to kind of anticipate how to listen and what to be listening for if they're given a little bit more of a roadmap. You know, we don't have those GPSs in our head automatically yet, so we have to kind of listen to the directions that the speaker is going to provide us. I thought that you did provide a little bit of controversy and a reason why we have to talk about this, at least from the constitutional perspective. I thought it, however, was interesting that none of your supporting points then addressed that controversy. So raising is an issue and then not talking about it, I think, is a little bit self-defeating. You probably need to address that if that is one of the reasons that this is a controversial subject. Your two premises are that it's likely to decrease drug use and it's going to save us money in the long run. On the first point, there's this assumption that people will stop using the drugs, and I don't think that you demonstrate that that's the case. The best argument that I think you have here is the one that comes on the second point, which suggests that people, knowing that they couldn't pass the drug test, don't even follow through with their applications for this kind of assistance. And you had kind of a statistic on that point. So I think that that really fits with that second point. It doesn't really do much to advance your first point on them discontinuing the use of drugs. I didn't get any examples or statistics on this except a hypothetical of somebody who might be selling their food stamps to be able to buy drugs. So there needs to be some data here that suggests that there's a likelihood that people who are receiving this aid are using drugs or they're misusing their aid in some way, like you've just described in this hypothetical example, to use it to buy drugs. And then there ought to be some explanation that says if we were not enabling people, they would more likely get themselves straight, or if we are able to identify them, we could then put them into diversion programs that would result in some long-term benefit. But you just kind of take it as a presupposition that if people are faced with the choice of giving up drugs or not getting a food stamp card or an EBT card or something like that, that they would give up drugs. And I'm not exactly sure that that's a safe assumption. You know, I think most drug users would probably forego the food for themselves and perhaps for their families, which is again where some of that controversy happens to come into play. On the second point on the cost issue, like I already said, I think there's an argument here that you could show that we would reduce the demand for these sorts of services if we required the drug testing. Now, the first evidence that you present on the drug test is that 13 states have been using this, and you have some data from North Carolina. That's good information. I think that that's important. It's placed in the appropriate spot here. You do want to give us source citations on this information. I didn't really get a source citation on any of this. I'm not doubting that it is true, but you ought to be able to document it in some way, and so that's one of the reasons that you want to have those kinds of references in the presentation. That's the one that suggested that 24% of the people who are applying were under the influence of some kind of drug, which suggests a lot of people who are receiving these benefits do have drug issues. And then the question then becomes, so are we going to be able to discourage them from applying for the aid? That's where your second piece of information says, we had 70 people who didn't even show up because, once they realized they had to take a drug test, they weren't going to do it, which would show that there's a potential for savings there. And again, on that first point, that it might control their drug use, I think you need better evidence on that point. If there are 13 states that have this information, you only have positive data for your position, it looks like, from North Carolina. You then raise the issue of Florida as an example, and you basically dismiss Florida and suggest it's a failure because they only discovered 15% are using drugs. I'm not exactly sure why that shows that the drug testing in Florida is a failure. Did they not save money? What's their experience? Did they keep people off the programs? That's the thing that I think is missing here. That's the kind of evidence that you need to have for the claims that you're presenting, and that's the stuff that isn't in the presentation. So I think you're making a lot of generalizations based on assumptions that need better data to them. You need to look at us a little bit more when you're making the argument and explain these concepts to us, as it is, you have a tendency to just look down the whole time. You're doing a lot of reading. And I'm not sure why you're doing a lot of reading, because there's not a lot of evidence that you're presenting. It's just that you've kind of written out your explanation of what the argument is. That's the stuff where you should be looking us in the eye and telling us, here's the problem that we've got. We've got a bunch of people who are taking drugs, who are getting social benefits, and that there's something wrong with that. If they can afford the drugs, they shouldn't need this kind of money. Or if they're getting social aid, we should be able to help them get off of the drugs. That's the point of the speech that I'm trying to make. And just look us in the eye and tell us what your argument is. And then if you need to look down at evidence, because like I said, I don't expect people to memorize statistics or quotes or something like that, then that's kind of when you need to do that. But you have to be able to talk to people about your argument. You're doing a little bit too much reading on those sorts of things. And let's look for a better exit than the old Porky Pig standby, which I've heard from a lot of people. Yeah. That's it.